What's going on, guys? Welcome to a review of Attack on Titan, the final season, the final chapters, part two. Also, just the finale of the entire series. And with me, as always, I have Blue Spade. Um, I mean,
Mhm.
this finale has been a long time coming. I mean, Attack on Titan started in 2013. Technically, the manga started in 2011. Uh, and I mean, it's been something that's building up for years and years. I mean, of course, like I said, ever since 2013, and now we finally have the end of the series. I mean, a lot of people were kind of making fun of it because of how it was called the final season, and it's technically not really like the final season because there were multiple parts to it. But I mean, it made sense why they did it that way. Of course, they're not going to do the whole thing in one season, but it's supposed to be the final. I guess you'd say the final arcs of the story. Um,
Yeah,
but
it there there were a lot of mixed feelings going into this ever since we've, heard about heard or read
yeah,
or got spoiled about the ending, like, 2 years
so
ago,
we'll get to the
and
ending. I I of course like I'll just say like I already knew what to expect with the ending. The manga ending has been out for a while now. I pretty much spoiled myself when it came out because I heard how divisive it was. So I looked up what the ending was, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say what my feelings are because I tend to, of course, lean on the side of I think it was absolutely terrible and what completely goes against all the themes of Attack on Titan, and especially goes against Aaron's character that we've who at least who has been set up as for especially post time skip in Attack on Titan. I feel like he feels like a completely different character, um, and it's a completely disappointing ending in my opinion. Of course, like I said, it's a very divisive ending. A lot of people, it of course had a lot of defenders. A lot of people want to try to justify how it ended. Um, I don't know. Like I feel like we'll get to that though. Because I have a lot more problems with this than just the ending. I'd seen scenes from the manga from the like I guess you'd say the final climax of the story, but I'd never really like seen all of these scenes like in their entirety and how they played out until I watched this, and it just felt, in my opinion, it felt like really disconnected from everything else I'd seen before this because mainly because due to the writing, I would say, not so much like how it was animated. I thought I'll just say like in terms of animation and everything looked fine. There was some CG, of course, but I mean, I was mostly fine with the way everything looked. Where I had a problem was with the characters and just how everything was written and how I feel like everything happened way too conveniently. Um, I felt like should have been a lot more sacrifice. A lot more people should have died that of course didn't end up dying and it got saved in my opinion because of pretty much because of convenience. Um, but yeah, I had quite a few problems with the way the finale or the climax of the story played out. Um,
yeah, I mean, speaking of, like, characters somehow surviving, there were moments in this episode or just this overall, like, fight sequence that, like, certain characters should have died, at certain moments, but
yeah.
somehow they didn't. And especially even like, near the end of that battle, with the pure Titans, I mean, that, um, they just keep
Yeah,
escalating up to the point to
that was
where there's
that's really like the I would say a prime example of what I'm talking about. Um, there were so many moments where a lot of characters it should have been the end for them and it wasn't, and it felt like it just felt like you really, like I said, very convenient, and it didn't really make a lot of sense. Um, it really felt like at this point in the story, it feels like Isayama was really like trying to rush through it. To be honest, um, I really wish like Isayama had done because we know he's been heavily involved with the production of the anime. I really wish that they had the like Bleach Thousand Year Blood War approach to this. Not necessarily saying like that means I want AOE or anything like that, but I wish that he had used this as an opportunity to fix like a lot of things that were people had complaints about from the manga, like what they were doing with Thousand Year Blood War. Um,
okay, well, the way this whole thing was handled is they announced the anime as being the final season before the manga was finished.
yeah,
So that's So that like it led me scratching my head at the time when they announced this. Like we knew back then at that time that the manga was not finished, and like we're still like scratching our heads like how. I mean, it leads us to think like, oh, that means the manga is about to finish really soon. But then the final ending comes out like 2 years ago when we hear about this, and then like, and that's when the whole floodgates of outrage and divisiveness started pouring out on the internet.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
yeah, it's just like I'm just wondering like was the reason for them announcing that the anime was going into its final season the reason why Isayama uh made the ending the way that he did,
I
or was there just another reason entirely?
I mean,
We just don't
yeah,
know.
we don't really know. I mean, people speculate it could have been pressure from like his publishers or his agent or something that told him like, hey, you need to end this differently. But in my opinion, even if that were the case, I still felt like he could have come up with something better than what he did. We also know that Isayama, obviously, he's mentioned in interviews he had another ending in mind before the series gained the popularity that it did. And of course, he said it was going to be a much darker ending than what we eventually ended up getting. But I feel like he probably had multiple different endings in mind. Um, I feel like we have a lot of it, at this point we know for sure that I mean, of course, we can already just go ahead and spoil it, like AOE didn't end up happening. um and people point to a lot of evidence about AOE that we've seen in previous seasons that kind of point towards, we know Isayama likes to do foreshadowing, and there's some hints that we've seen in previous seasons that kind of hint at how the story could have ended. I have to wonder if this was one of, instead of this pointing towards maybe AOE or an anime original ending he was potentially going to do. What it could have been just one of the endings Isayama was maybe trying to build towards, but then at the last minute he decided to basically do this ending that we got. It could have been that. I don't know. I mean, like you said, we'll never really know what the real reason was that this is the ending we ended up with.
I mean, I got in expecting that this was gonna be the ending that we were gonna get because
Yeah,
there was
I
no
was
way
fifty
around it.
fifty honestly. Like I was a lot of me wanted to believe that it was possible that it could end differently, mainly because we know one of Isayama's inspirations, which I explained in a video, was Muv-Luv, which basically, or well, more specifically, Muv-Luv Alternative, which kind of the plot for that is similar, very similar to Attack on Titan, and it kind of deals with multiple timelines, like Attack on Titan tends to hint towards at times. Um, and basically an alternative, the ending changes, and people thought because of that, and that being Isayama's main inspiration, that could be like, maybe, I don't know, hinting that Isayama might do something different here. But at the same time, I also thought that it's probably unlikely that's going to happen. I just, a part of me also thought that, yeah, they're probably going to just do the manga ending, but I didn't want to say for sure because I thought there was that's chance that it could be, it could also be different. Because like I said, we already had some kind of hints and foreshadowing that pointed towards something, maybe it concluding some other way. But of course, that's unfortunately not what we got.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there were some amount of dialogue changes that I've noticed.
yeah, we can
Particularly that
talk
there
about
was
that. Yeah, they changed some things, and they changed the wording of things that, in my opinion, it doesn't really change the overall meaning, and in some ways, I would say it kind of portrays some characters worse than how it did even in the manga. But yeah, we'll get to that. Um,
yeah. But the episode itself, of course, it immediately picks up after the events of the last episode, which is of course the Alliance landing right on Aaron's rib cage, and basically all hell breaks loose, and this entire sequence, like more than half the episode is like just this long drawn out fight sequence taking up top, like on top of Aaron.
Yeah, I
And
was
like
kind of surprised because, I mean, it's weird because this whole finale didn't feel as long as it actually is, which it's pretty much movie length. Like it's about an hour 30 minutes, but it really does. Maybe it's just because of the pacing of it, but it felt like the whole fight went by way like everything was happening way too fast, in my opinion. Maybe that's how it was in the manga too, but it felt like watching this, it felt like things were just, uh, uh yeah, like it was just mostly this fight with Aaron, and it's just felt like so much was happening at once that you couldn't really follow some of it.
Yeah, and Armin, of course, like suggests that he should transform to his colossal titan, but then before he can do that, he's captured by um, like I don't know which titan it is.
I'm guessing
It
it
looks
might be
like, you know.
one of the Jaw Titans because we see like a lot of previous Titan shifters that come out of the rib cage, basically to surround the Alliance.
Yeah, they're basically just countless versions of the Nine Titans. Like you see different variations of the Jaw Titan, the Armored Titan, um, so on and so forth. But they just like completely outnumber everybody, and it just leads to the point where like you could, there were moments when several characters should have died, like Levi, Jean, Connie, you know, in particular, like they nearly died at several points in this
I mean,
episode.
to be fair though, like Levi throughout the series, there was so many times he should have died. I mean, especially when he got blown up in the final season, and he, he was in a bad shape for a while, but then he recovered, and now he's pretty much back to normal. He just has scars all over his face.
Yeah, and just when things are about to go bad, Falco alongside uh, you know
You're cutting out.
Abby. So just when things are about to go really bad, Falco all of a sudden flies in with a different version of his Jaw Titan form, which he can now fly, and he's alongside Annie and Gabby this time, and they come up with a plan to uh, help free Armin from the Titan. If I had to guess, that Titan that captured Armin is probably a Car Titan, if I'm guessing
Oh
right, because
yeah,
there's
yeah.
no way there'll be no way for it to be a Jaw Titans because it doesn't have any like physical features to be like qualified for a Jaw Titan. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, they managed to you know they almost free Armin at several points, but uh Mitsuka gets blocked, and then it gets and we switch over to Armin's perspective, just basically trying to tell himself to get back up. But
Mm.
then like he gets like he Armin eventually meets Zeke in the paths, and they eventually end up having a conversation about the meaning of life, and about and
Well,
they of course
the origins of
they
life
both
too, which they kind of try to explain the centipede creature that we saw before, and basically like trying to say that was, I guess, the origin of life or where it came from.
Yeah, and eventually, like they both each share their viewpoints. Like of course, we know Zeke wanting to, yeah, euthanize the alien race, but of course that didn't end up happening with Aaron. Pretty much like just throwing all those plans out the window. But
Yeah.
then Armin eventually convinces Zeke by telling him his viewpoint, and
Well,
then they all
they have a conversation about like is Zeke basically says like what he's in this like I guess depressed state after he's lost everything, and he says like something about like what's the point of living if it's like if it's all meaningless, and Armin says that life is full of meaningless things but they can also be valuable or something like that, and Zeke thinks back to his time playing catch with uh Kisvar, and he thinks that he finds that there was like value in that even if it was I guess technically meaningless, and that kind of convinces Zeke to side with Armin, I guess, because then Armin also talks to some of the other people and paths that have passed away. Like we see Bertolt, we see Grisha, we see some of the other uh, some of the other, I guess, previous Nine Titans show up, and they basically basically Zeke tries to ask them for help, while Armin at the same time asks them for help against Eren. Um, and here's where I have another problem with how this is written. I feel like not all of them would be on their side. I mean, to me, it would make more sense if they had differing viewpoints about this, especially considering I'm assuming they should know what Eren is doing and why he's doing it. And they obviously, like, some of them would have also have a problem with Marley and had been oppressed by Marley. So I wouldn't think that they'd, of course, these are all Eldians, as we know that the Titans have always been Eldian. And I mean, they're basically just trying to stop Eren from, killing essentially their oppressors. Then they know if they did that, that Marley could potentially kill off the rest of the Eldian people. But yet they still decide to side against Eren. We don't know why. They just do.
Yeah, it's just another thing is like, we see them, but they don't really, converse back with either Zeke or
That was
Armin. They
another thing
just
too. Like, because to me it feels out of character for them to do this, but they never none of them ever really speak their mind about this. They don't say anything, and they just go along with what they're told.
and yeah, and eventually, like, we see their Titan forms manifesting and basically helping out Mikasa and the others reach Armin, and freeing him from his captivity. And then also, like, we also see Zeke materialize, from one of the ribs, and then I guess his last moments is saying how beautiful the world looks, but seeing as like he's responsible for everything that's happened, he doesn't deserve it, and that's when, of course, Levi, swoops in and decapitates him for good.
Yeah. Yeah. Meanwhile, they're also Peak was also trying to blow up. I think the neck area, like where Aaron's
Yeah,
head is, with dynamite. Of course, like they they end up dropping the dynamite. I think they have to get it back. I think Jean has to try to get it back, and try to.
I think it was like what was it, those pump triggers that they used
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
blow up
yeah.
the
The trigger for
dynamite.
the dynamite. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like Peak tries numerous times just to try to reach that trigger, but she gets stopped by what was it? I forgot what the name of that Titan was. It's
It was.
uh,
I was it the one they were chasing after in the beginning. The one with like the look like a
yeah.
bullet. I forget what.
No, no, no. It's the one that Aaron consumed at the
Oh,
beginning
the
of the
Warhammer Titan.
uh yeah, the
Yeah.
Warhammer Titan. Yeah, that was the exact same Warhammer Titan that Aaron fought back in one of the earlier seasons, well, of the final season, of course. Um but yeah, is eventually Jean is the one who helps trigger the blast, and eventually, like, we see, like, what was it, that centipede like creature, like, come out from the nape area,
Hmm.
and that's when, of course, they just they decide to activate the colossal titan, just basically just nuke the damn thing,
Yeah.
uh to oblivion. So Armin, like, of course, transforms into the colossal titan, and then just tries to blow up the thing. And then and of course, this switches over to like a brief reunion of all the of the alliance members, reuniting with their families, up on, like, what was it, the Marley base.
I think it was Fort Salva. I think this is the same place that we saw in the beginning of the final season that they're at.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and um, I mean, despite that short reunion, the centipede is, of course, somehow survives that blast,
yeah.
and it lets out like this, like, this strange mist thing that that ends up turning everyone on that, well, most of everyone on that, on that base into pure Titans.
Yeah.
And this, yeah, and then of course it gets from bad to worse from there. And not only that, like, Centipede tries to merge back with Aaron, who transforms into like almost like a colossal Titan version
Of the Attack
of
Titan.
himself. Yeah, of the Titan. And then of course Armin, just basically just goes one on one against Aaron. Uh, the fight itself is like it's just mostly it's all CG
Yeah.
from yeah. I mean, it wasn't bad, but then it gets a little bit jarring at times when you see them duking it out at times. And then also at the same time you see um you see everyone else just like literally trying to stop that giant centipede from merging back with Aaron, and
Yeah,
then at the
basically,
same
like,
time they're all,
Reiner tries to hold it off, or tries to hold the centipede back. Um, and meanwhile, Mikasa and Levi, uh, and I think, or no, Gabby stays behind. That's right. Um,
yeah. Well, Gabby also turns into a pure
oh
Titan
yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
Also, we should mention Gabby earlier again gets a headshot on. I forget what head she like headshotted. Some
It was I think she headshotted that Titan that took
I want to know how
that
Gabby is
took
so
Armin.
accurate with a rifle. Like, I mean, we know she's a soldier, obviously. She's a child soldier, but how, like, she, every time she shoots something, she ends up hitting it, like, at point, like, precisely. I don't know. It's like she's just
I, I
way
mean,
too accurate.
I mean she's had military training, for
Yeah.
one thing. I mean, obviously she's had like numerous amounts of training with a weapon at times. I mean, obviously, like we see the results of her training after she's killed Sasha, shot
She blew Aaron's head off.
yeah,
She killed,
but-
she pretty much killed Flock.
yeah, well, nearly killed
Yeah.
Flock at one point. And then, of course, shoots a giant Titan in the head that was keeping Armin
Yeah.
hostage. But yeah, but yeah, like I was saying with Gabby, Jean, Connie, as well as like everyone's family members and friends turning into pure Titans, it just goes from bad to worse. And like Mikasa, Levi, and whoever's left realize that they need to kill Aaron at this point. There's no way around it because
Yeah.
with that giant centipede, like getting close to reconnecting with Aaron, they have no other options. So and of course this leads to a final sequence with Levi using a thunder spear to destroy pretty much opening an opening in Aaron's Titan mouth, and Mikasa of course swooping in and then just
Well,
without
we should
hesitating
mention
just
too. We get like this. Uh, I I don't know if like it. Well, sort of a dream that Mikasa sees, or a vision of her running off with Eren and them living together in a cabin. Basically, this is like, I guess, supposed to be a what if scenario. Like, what if Mikasa decided to be with Eren instead of Eren starting to rumbling, and they go off together to be in this cabin, to live at this cabin, like Eren living out the rest of his limited lifespan with Mikasa at this cabin. And it's heavily implied that, of course, like they're, romantically involved. And then, of course, Eren eventually lays slumped over and dies. People argue that this is another timeline, or it's just something that Mikasa sees as a vision. I don't know. It really doesn't matter anymore at this point, because that I feel like Isayama's just kind of put a lot of these theories to rest with sort of ending things the same way. But yeah, it's just I guess it's essentially like a what could have been or something.
yeah. And then of course it transitions us back into the um into the ending of the fight with Mikasa just swooping into the Titan's mouth, and then just without hesitation just beheads Eren.
Yeah, beheads him and kisses his head. Um, and of course, Ymir is watching this with like a smile on her face for some reason. Um, and then like we earlier in the episode got like a flashback of Ymir releasing, I think, these pigs from a stable. And then again we get like we see these other flashbacks of Ymir with King Fritz and like I guess her daughters. Um, but we get more on that like later when Aaron is talking to Armin in the paths.
Yeah, basically they discuss like
Oh, we
everything
should mention too,
that's
like right when this happens, or well, actually, right when the explosion happened, we saw this brief scene with Historia giving birth to a child. Um, we see the
yeah.
child later. It has no significance. Like this is the another thing that confuses me because if we remember in the beginning, or I think it was part two, final season part two, or no, it was part one, where we basically get to know what happened with Historia. That she's basically just been living on this farm with a farmer who we find out was one of her childhood bullies that threw rocks at her, and she is like pregnant, presumably with his child. It seemed like they were trying to build up some potential like significance or mystery around her being pregnant with the child, but it seems like it really doesn't lead anywhere because she gives birth to the child and there's nothing else really to it, which really leaves me scratching my head. Also, not to mention the fact that she was gotten pregnant by someone who had bullied her in the past. None of it really made any sense to me. I,
Yeah, and I also didn't like the fact that how underused she was in this finale. I mean, despite like she played an important role in prior seasons to this,
yeah.
and ever since she became like the queen of Paradise Island, it's just like they just completely shafted her. It's like she just played no other role after this. I mean, she like her last role was giving Aaron, his final vision of what's going to be happening, at the end of all
Oh
things,
yeah. So
Yeah,
right,
that was
it is
it.
confirmed that when he touched Historia's hand, he saw everything. He saw everything, but he wasn't able to prevent anything from happening the same way. Which when he talks to Armin, he pretty much more or less says that. And when we try to get any answers from Aaron, he says is that only Ymir knows, which is honestly, like in my opinion, just a massive cop out because you don't really want to explain how he knows any of this, why he didn't do things differently. Um, only Ymir knows, but we're never going to find out anything from Ymir because Ymir never communicates or says anything. She just stands there and then she disappears eventually. Uh, you know,
Ye- Yeah, and of course he confirms to Armin that
oh,
he
so
basically just
also we should mention too, of course, like once Aaron's head is cut off, like Mikasa cuts off his head, the um, all the pure Titans, like we see them go back to being normal humans again. Um, the basically like whatever I guess once the founder gets, I guess once he gets killed, like hallucinogenia also disappears or something, and
yeah.
the pure Titans just go back to normal people. Um, I don't know. I guess somehow it ended or well, I guess potentially temporarily ended the Titan curse. I don't know.
Yeah, it just in a way, I
I
guess, but
that's the
yeah,
problem
but
though. It's like, I mean, what are we supposed to take away from that? Because like it's not really explained. It just happens, and we're supposed to kind of feel like draw our own conclusions from like a lot of what happens. Um, but yeah, like I mean, like it felt like those characters should have definitely died there, but of course they pretty much everybody in the alliance lives. Um, we see Levi seeing all his former comrades and all that, and he of course also lives. When he also, especially in my opinion, should have died for sure. He's cheated death so many times in this series. He should have died so many times at this point. And I feel like this ending, or at the ending, he should have especially been killed off. Um, but yeah, of course he lives.
yeah, and of course back to the whole thing with Aaron and
Yeah.
Armin. There's of course that that whole like that infamous conversation about like
Oh well, before
Aaron
we get to
wanting
that too,
to.
Aaron goes over what if we remember at the beginning of the series when the Smile Titan went to eat his mother, Aaron said that he was the one that directed the Smile Titan to. Well, the Smile Titan could have eaten Bertolt and prevented everything that was going to happen, but he decided to direct it to instead eat his mother. Um, but he doesn't really explain why he did that, except that of course, like he says, only Ymir knows this. Um, but
Eh,
yeah,
I mean, you could point to a scenario that if Aaron, no, changed anything or even tried to change anything, then it would still lead to Marley coming in and invading Paradise Island and exterminating everyone there.
I
And
I don't know. Like it seems like he's in my opinion, like the way he's being portrayed in this ending, like to me it's like they tried to make him into basically like the best way I can describe it is they tried to turn him into Lelouch and make him like a sacrificial, like to sacrifice everything for his friends. But it's like with Lelouch it made more sense why he decided to do what he did. With Aaron, like we don't really get any answers. We don't really know why he's doing what he's doing. Um,
yeah, it just feels a little bit too convoluted at times whenever he tries to explain some of this. Like you mentioned that he said Ymir only knows the answer, which is like, I mean, what I mean, like I said, just there's no way to communicate. Well, there's been no attempt to really communicate with Ymir because she doesn't really talk, and you could point out the fact that her tongue's cut out by the king, but like she's a wandering spirit, and there's no like
I
I don't think there's any
I
physical
feel like
basis
we
for
should
her
have
to not
gotten
talk.
like a lot more monologue or something from Aaron to get inside his head to figure out like what he was thinking at the time when he was doing the rumbling or something. But we don't get any of it. All we get is like the Alliance's perspective for the most part. We don't get to know what why Aaron's doing it, like what he's thinking. Especially even like Ymir, especially. We never really. I mean, of course, I feel like there's other ways Ymir could have communicated, considering she's like some kind of a spirit, but she never does, and we don't really know even how Aaron is able to even really understand her, except through the paths. Um, but yeah, of course, this conversation with Aaron and Armin, it leads them into like they visit various different places on the outside. Armin, like, I guess he blames himself for having shown Aaron the outside world or shown him that book that, like, told him what the outside world was like. But I just feel like that's a really messed up way of looking at it because, like, it's like Aaron wanted to see the world. He wanted to be free like Armin did. And he didn't want to be, behind those walls his whole life. Um, Granted, what he has to end up doing for him and everybody behind the walls to be free is pretty messed up, but it's really the only way because I feel like the series, especially Isayama, ended up writing all the characters into this corner where there wasn't really any other way of them like trying to attain peace with Marley or well any sort of lasting peace. Um, but yeah, like they visit these different places and then eventually they get to the ocean, like how we saw at the end of season 3. And that's where they talk about Mikasa, and it gets really confusing here, especially because it seems like they're trying to imply that Mikasa was way more important than that she was ever really seemed to meant to be. Like that she was the one to stop all this, or Aaron, or at least Aaron foresaw that Mikasa was the one that was going to bring an end to I guess bring an end to the curse or whatever. Even though like it just doesn't make sense. They don't explain how how that's how that's possible. Except that Mikasa was it was
Yeah,
all about her. It wasn't about
I,
about what Aaron
I
wanted.
mean, you could say Aaron foresaw this happening, but yeah, it's just like this whole thing, like it still literally doesn't make sense because that like there could have been other factors Aaron could have taken, but he doesn't really. he doesn't really elaborate much of like if there was any way he could have changed it, anything. But
Well,
it's just
and
the
also,
only thing I can really,
yep,
yeah, it's
yeah.
just,
Well, the conversation also eventually devolves into like it just seems it comes out of nowhere because Armin asks basically like, well, what about how Mikasa feels? And I mean, it's just it really just comes out of left field. It comes out of nowhere because as far as we know, like Aaron doesn't really he doesn't really have any kind of romantic interest in Mikasa, and until up until of course this point, we haven't seen him really like show any of that. It's been pretty one sided the whole series, where Mikasa is completely obsessed with Eren, and I mean with this ending we really see how far her obsession goes. I mean it's pretty. I mean she's completely just obsessed with him.
yeah,
But Armin basically says like, well, I mean, what you did like really essentially like really hurt Mikasa's feelings, and Aaron at this point like it seems like he just completely breaks down. And there, of course, like you said, we get this the infamous scene that of course we all saw from the
So,
manga. Um,
I mean, I don't mind. I kind of didn't mind too much that Aaron, confesses to this, but why does he need to
the
tell
way it
Armin about
happens,
this?
like I mean, it would be one thing if Aaron like calmly said like maybe like yeah I had some kind of romantic interest in her or something like that, but the way he does it, he completely breaks down and starts crying and saying, "Oh, I don't want Mikasa to be with another man. I want her to think about me for a long time." It seems like just this very selfish, like childish thing that it felt like from what we've seen, everything we've seen of Aaron post time skip, he's not been like this at all. I mean, maybe you could argue that he was like, he had moments where he would break down in previous seasons before the time skip, but it wouldn't be over something like this. It would be like Aaron lamenting over him being powerless or something like that, or him being unable to do anything, uh, when he should have, had the ability to stop it or something. It wasn't anything about Mikasa or him, obsessing over Mikasa or anything like that. So this just feels like completely out of character, and just like I said, it comes out of nowhere. But yeah, he just says, I want Mikasa to think about me for a long time," and Armin just is standing there, just pretty much saying like that. He literally says, "I never expected you to say something so pathetic." Like I just couldn't believe. Like I mean, when I read this in the manga, I couldn't believe that this was something that Isayama wrote and thought was a good idea to put in the manga. But the fact that it was still left in and they animated this, I mean, I just don't know. It just feels like it feels like something from a different series almost. Like it doesn't even feel like something
Yeah,
from Attack on Titan. Like I mean,
yeah,
Armin even does like this like smug grin or something when he's talking about like uh it's
I'm not suggesting that like Mikasa might go out with another
yeah
guy
like
after this, but in terms about the confession, it's just like why I really felt like it could have had more impact if he would have made this confession to Mikasa. It would
there
have
were
had and
there were
would
so many
it would have
opportunities
had
for
more.
him to do this and he didn't, because I mean as far as we knew he didn't, that wasn't on his mind. He was thinking more about the freedom of his people and all that. Like what, he wasn't considering like her feelings at all.
Yeah. I mean, well, so if people were to bring up that whole what if scenario with Mikasa seeing Eren like not going through the with rumbling, that no, that's BS. I'm not counting that moment as like a confession, like some kind of confession scene because
Yeah.
Eren had so many opportunities to do this, um, at numerous occasions, even before this. But then his last, face to face moment with Mikasa was, him telling her he hated her.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was it. I mean, there could have been like another instance, like even before this, like he could have just straight up said that he loves Mikasa, but there was like no instance in the where he could have told her that, and it just felt like yeah, it's and the fact that like he tells everybody else this other than Mikasa, just yeah, yeah. I just felt like just felt his like overall confession just yeah didn't feel, I don't know, I just don't feel anything from it.
Yeah, it just it also seems like something that really, in my opinion, should be on the bottom of the priority list in terms of Aaron trying to explain his actions and why he did what he did and all this stuff about Ymir. But instead, we just have this conversation where Armin is basically going after him because he hurt Mikas's feelings, essentially. And then Aaron just kind of goes into this sort of self-deprecating speech about how he said he's just this idiot that happened to gain power, basically, which is it's something. I think this was a new line because I don't remember. I had read the scene from the manga, and I think this is something that Isayama added in, but I don't really understand why he added this line because it actually makes Aaron look even worse. Because him just saying like, "Oh, I'm just an idiot. I'm nobody," where we were kind of led to believe that he was this really important figure and that he was going to basically lead his people to freedom, more or less. But now he just breaks down and says that it doesn't matter. It just seems, like I said, it seems so just completely out of character. But yeah, he says that, and then there's another kind of alteration of how the scene played out in the manga, because in the manga, Armin thanks Eren. Specifically, what he said is, "Thank you for becoming a mass murderer for our sake," which sounded ridiculous. So I feel like maybe Isayama realized how ridiculous that sounded, and instead he made Armin say, like, embrace Eren and say, like, I'll see you in hell, like we're going to hell together, pretty much. But it really doesn't make it any better, in my opinion. It doesn't really make it come across any less ridiculous. Like the whole scene and how it played out.
Yeah, and then and of course once well, actually no, before the scene ends, like Aaron says that, like that he'll erase Aaron, all the memories of having this conversation, and then basically just leaving it to chance that everything will play out exactly the way it should be, which eventually
which I should point out directly goes against what Aaron said earlier in the series, where he wouldn't leave Paradis up to fate, or everything up to fate, basically, which is what he ends up doing actually at the end of the series, is he leaves everything up to fate. He leaves everything up to Armin, I guess, to try to fix everything.
I'll get back to this again later, but
because we see the outcome of that.
Yeah, so like after this, that whole conversation, Armin wakes up, and then of course he ends up mourning, the death of his best friend, with him being beheaded by Mikasa, of course. Mikasa decides.
We should point out as well, like right after they defeat Eren, and they basically the Marleyans. There was actually a scuffle earlier between some of the surviving Eldians and the Marleyans, where it was believed the Marleyans had shot them, but actually one of the Marleyans had shot his gun up in the air, basically to try to de-escalate things. They're basically trying to show, like, oh well, some of the Marleyans are good, which I think that's probably true. But as we know, that's not how probably like the rest of Marley feels. But anyways, like
assuming if they're if that whole country still even exists after all of that.
Well, we know that they do, because as we know, like Eren he didn't do a full rumbling, so I mean they are definitely still around. But yeah, so Armin basically tries to they point their guns at the Alliance, and Armin says something like I'm the one that killed Eren Yeager, the devil, or whatever. This is kind of similar, actually, like, speaking of Code Geass, kind of similar to how the ending of Code Geass played out as well, even though of course, in my opinion, it was much better there, and it made, like I said, it made sense. But Suzaku, was the one, or Suzaku dressing up as Zero ended up killing the Emperor, or Lelouch, and still portraying Zero as being like the hero that everybody thought he was. It kind of reminded me of that, where it felt like they were basically like, maybe Isayama's trying to sort of like make Armin like a Suzaku like character, I guess. and like with him trying to basically turn Aaron into the Lush, that Armin was like supposed to be like Suzaku or something. Um,
Yeah, yeah, but it just, it's like, but it just basically just ends that scene right then and there. Basically, just Armin just helps, de-escalate the situation from getting any worse by convincing whatever Marleans are left at that, at that area to, not exterminate any aliens, at that point. But we switch over to Mikasa, who decides to wander back into Paradise Island to bury Aaron's head because she knows, like, that nobody else will be willing to bury Aaron's head after this. And then of course she
she
has
buries
her.
his head under the tree, under yeah.
Yeah, I mean, never mind, not really trying to explain how she even got back there by herself, but it's but she has this like final conversation with the spirit of Ymir, talking about how like how she believes that Ymir wanted to be free of all of this or something.
Well, actually, it was I think we also, oh, I forgot to mention, yeah, we also, speaking of Ymir, Aaron, basically was telling Armin earlier that Ymir had actually been in love with King Fritz, and that she longed to see him again or something like that. Which, for what we know, Fritz had kidnapped her, like had basically like enslaved her and forced her to bear his children. Um, I mean, granted, we don't really know anything about how their relationship was beyond that, but from what we're told, I mean, it was obviously an abusive relationship where Fritz, I mean, I don't think we're supposed to believe that Fritz really cared about her like that. He only really saw her as a way to carry on his genes essentially. Um, but we're told that Ymir, I guess, supposedly was in love with him. So I mean, if at best you could portray that as like Stockholm syndrome, basically, of her being in love with her abuser. Because I mean, obviously, I don't think that would have been a healthy relationship. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah,
this is another thing that really left me scratching my head. But of course, I knew about that from the manga as well. But just to see it in the anime too, it's just, I'm just, again, it's something else that I'm just really completely baffled by. Like, why was this put in here? Why did Isayama think that would make any sense? Um, I don't know, but I feel like maybe Isayama is trying to draw some kind of parallel between Ymir being in love with Fritz and like Mikasa being in love with Eren, but it's just not the same because Mikasa's love is one sided, first of all. Second of all, she's not really a slave to Eren. I mean, it felt like they were maybe trying to imply that with how she followed Eren around, but Eren wasn't willingly like enslaving her or anything. She just decided to follow him and to pray, basically like always protect him and stuff.
she's indebted to Aaron for saving her
Yeah,
life,
I mean, to me,
in their
it's
childhood.
not the same thing at all. Like, they're no way comparable. Um, Aaron never like forced himself on her, to force her to breed his children, to have his children, or anything like that. So I don't really see, even if that were the case, it's not, like I said, it doesn't make sense as a comparison.
Yeah, and and of course, this leads to, Mikasa talking to Ymir, and of course Ymir just passes on into the afterlife, or supposedly, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, and then time skips 3 years later. We see what happens on Paradise Island with uh with Historia, with with her child, 3 years old and all, but mentions that the Jaegerists have gained power and basically just like taken control of the country, uh, they potentially preparing for a future attack against the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And and then of course, at the same time, she tries, to be a mediator of all this by making peace talks with whatever's left of the other countries around the world that survived the rumbling.
Oh, I
And
see. The
so,
alliance is also has that role too, to be like, I guess, like some kind of uh peacekeepers or something between Marley and
yeah,
Eldia.
yeah, even though they know that, like, that majority of the Paradise Island pretty much hate their guts, for killing Eren in the first place
Yeah.
because they view him as a martyr now. But but based on like the whole post credit sequence, it doesn't appear that um, they suffered any serious repercussions
Well,
for
well,
doing
not in
so.
their. I mean, well, like the post credit show, like not in their lifetime. Of course, they. I guess the whole thing about them living out their lives. I suppose it happened, but my question is like people would argue that defend the ending would say like, oh well, they still had peace, but I really do wonder about that, especially like we saw that the Jaegers are still around. They still hate Marley. They still want war with Marley. There's Marley, whatever's left of it, probably still hates Eldia. There's not really any. I find it hard to believe it really brought about any kind of peace, to be honest. Um, as we saw, they
I mean,
lived probably, but I mean, I don't. I wonder if they really had. Did they? My question is, did they really have peaceful lives? Like, I guess we'll never really
yeah.
know, but
I mean, I mean, we could get back to that, like in that post credit
yeah.
sequence we see, but um, well, of course, we shift back to Mikasa, going back to Shiganshina with minus the walls, pretty much like she buried Aaron's head under that same tree that he would nap under. Well, basically, the same tree that we see him waking up in the beginning of the series, and then of course she of course mourns for his death, and then and of course there's that infamous scene in which we see the bird wrapping the scarf around her neck.
Mhm.
Um, and then yeah, that's where that's of course the ending of of the entire series at that up to
Yeah,
that
and of
point.
course, like the bird is implied to be, I guess, the spirit of Aaron or something watching over her. Um,
Mhm.
we also, yeah, but then of course we get these scenes that are pretty much the extra pages that we saw in the manga that we got after the ending. Um, we see that Mikasa, of course, throughout the years visited Aaron's grave with John. And it's implied that her and John are together. But then, of course, when Mikasa eventually ends up dying, she also gets buried under the tree, like right where Aaron is. Um, so, which, like I mentioned earlier, kind of shows how completely obsessed she still is with Aaron. To be honest, like I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly like I like John as character, and I kind of have to feel bad for him because I mean I don't think Mikasa really loves John. Um, she just decided to get with John. Um, but
Unless it could be, unless it could be interpreted differently, suggesting that Mikasa never really got with anyone, and then like everybody else around her are basically just friends and descendants of all of her other friends of like
possibly,
Reiner, Jean, and everybody else. But and I mean, because I looked at the manga panels, and it's completely different from from what you see here.
yeah.
And then of course uh, the sequence goes on like many generations later, perhaps maybe centuries or 1,000 years
Yeah,
later, in
because
which
we
we
see
see.
a very advanced civilization eventually, but it almost seems like a futuristic city. Um, but then, of course, at that point, they end up getting carpet bombed. Um, something somebody pointed out too is we see in the manga they eventually get carpet bombed by I'm guessing Marley. But in the manga, that shows they also get nuked, which was like a surprising addition. I guess like I don't really know why that was added. Like I didn't think it was necessary, but because we see that happen too, as they just get blown up. Um,
I mean, it's possible. Like, I really don't know if that had anything to do with a rumbling or such.
it's
It
hard to
could
say. I
be
mean,
like
it's years and years and years later, but I mean, I'm guessing we're supposed to assume that the two sides still hate each other or something, because I mean, that's what I would assume they would start a war over or bomb them over. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, and of course during the credit sequence we get a new Linked Horizon song because of course Linked Horizon's been there from the beginning and they came back to do a song for the ending. Um, but yeah, basically it's all the extra pages we saw from the manga play out, um, as well as the final page that we got from the extra pages, which we see basically it seems like the ruins of this of whatever's left of Paradis, I guess. And there's like this boy walking through the forest with his dog, and of course, like with Ymir, he comes across a tree, and it's to me that just implies that the cycle of the Titans is going to continue on into the future, because as we remember, Ymir found the tree, the hollowed out tree. She fell into the tree, and that's where she came into contact with the Hallucigenia, or the centipede. So it's implying that we don't really know. Considering you don't really know what happened to the centipede, I guess it's implied that it's probably still around, and it could potentially be in a tree like that or something. And that might be what happens with the kid. It seems like that's what it's implying. So basically, like, what I took away from that ending is that the cycle of the Titans is just going to continue, and it didn't really end, as well as the cycle of war, which, as far as I knew, this what was what Eren was really trying to end, was the cycle of war, and the only way to end it would have been to just completely wipe out the other side.
Yeah.
But of course, it never happened.
I mean, we could argue that that all of his friends, did leave, didn't manage to live like peaceful lives in their generation, of course.
Yeah, maybe.
But of course, it can't be said, after generations of what happened afterwards, where Shiganshina or Paradise Island still gets obliterated through war by whatever means it was. It's still there was still war in the end, and destroyed everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we're just left to it. It just leaves us to our interpretation of whether or not, like, how the story is going to end up continuing, whether or not if it will, with this boy and his dog, apparently going to the same tree that Eren and Mikasa are both buried at.
I mean,
So
I would be honestly surprised if Isayama decides to do some kind of a sequel or a continuation of the series. I mean, I don't know. I don't really even feel like it's necessary. The thing should have been concluded in the main series, but I don't know. I have to wonder if maybe somebody was telling him you should basically try to imply there could be continuation, so that you could try to make more, maybe milk more money out of the franchise or something. I'm not exactly sure what the reason behind that was, but
I mean, well, we seeing Code Geass, you know, did make
you're cutting up.
well action movie that kind of undermined the whole ending in the first place. But I
Yeah,
mean, I could see a possibility that Isayama might, consider
I
making like some
I
kind
would
of
say the difference
continuation.
there, though, is that Code Geass also had a fairly conclusive ending that didn't need a follow up. Attack on Titan had an ending that made no sense, and that it should have been a conclusive ending, but it wasn't. And the problem is that if it did continue, it would be far in the future with descendants, maybe, of the main characters from the original series, if anything. So, it's not really going to matter anymore anyway, because all those characters are dead. So it would essentially be, I mean, it would take place in the far future, and it would just, I guess, have Titans again, of course, because of the Titan curse being still continuing.
I mean, they could adapt that joke manga panel with like Aaron,
The high
Mikasa, and
school,
Armin.
or the
Yeah, the whole high school
yeah,
thing, like with the goth Mikasa and stuff. I mean, I could see them doing that, but it's just the continuing this, where this where the story leaves off. It's I don't know. It still leaves a bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths, even after this is all over. I mean, yeah, I keep hearing people are still praising this this ending, even after this episode is released. But over time, people will eventually have second thoughts about this, and seeing is like, could it be better? Yeah, it could have. I mean, but still, it's like it still doesn't erase the fact, it doesn't really erase the whole divisiveness that was established, 2 years ago when this was released.
yeah. Um, I don't know, like this. So yeah, this like this hour long or over hour long special, like I said, it like in and of itself, it just felt really disconnected from everything we've seen before. It just felt like there was way too many conveniences happening. A lot of different characters just acting really out of character, especially, I mean, Aaron as a prime example, of course. Um, but, and of course, we just have the way everything ended. Of course, it plays out the same way. If you've read the manga, you know. For those who haven't read the manga, well, now you're experiencing it for the first time. And I mean, I guess take of it what, take of that what you will. Um, to me, like I said before, you already know where my opinion is on the way this ends. I thought it was, I thought it could have ended much better. I thought it could have ended in a much more conclusive manner and one that made more sense. It felt like everything was just it happened way too quick as well. And in this last episode, I guess you would say, everything happened way too fast. It felt like the pacing was really it was very fast paced. And we kind of went through a lot of things we glossed over things that should have been important, and we didn't explain things like, especially anything having to do with Ymir, why Aaron was really doing it and what, his reasoning really was. We don't really get any of that. Instead, we just get Aaron just being pathetic and trying to, trying to basically like not really even trying to excuse what he did or anything like that. Just being down on himself and not really even answering any questions. So we don't really get any real definitive answers, and it's just it just feels like a different series almost with like a lot of what happens in this last episode. But I would say, like, as a whole, like Attack on Titan, it's something that I unfortunately, it's just going to be looked at as something that had like a lot of potential, but then with the ending, they really fumbled things like really bad. I mean, we've had rushed endings before, of course, but I feel like this one in particular just stands out because it just, like I said, a lot of these characters started acting out of character. And it felt like there was like a lot of things, conveniences that had to happen in order to get to where we got to in the end. And there was just a lot of loose plot threads left hanging, such as like what was the deal with Astoria and the child, and like I mentioned before, what exactly did Ymir really want? Why was Mikasa supposedly the answer to everything? Why was she so important? We don't really know. There's just so much about this that just doesn't make sense and it almost felt like it needed a lot more time to even try to to explain anything that what happened. And I don't know, like I said, it started, I even thought that post time skip Attack on Titan had a lot of good moments. It was really good, and I liked where it was building, what it was building to. I if I could pinpoint where things like seemed to go wrong, not so much in terms of the manga chapters, but it felt like this episode, honestly, because everything before this was actually, I had some problems with certain things, but it was still fine. But it felt like this point specifically is where things start. It seems like things started to really go downhill in terms of the writing. And I don't know the real reason. I guess we'll never really know the real reason as to why. But it just, like I said, it just didn't feel like the same series. And it felt like we should have gotten a much different conclusion than what ended up happening.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it because like I feel like this series deserves so much better because if not for this ending, in my opinion, I feel like it could have been like almost like a modern classic. Like it would have been regarded as one of like one of the greats in terms of anime that's come out. And it was at one point, like it was about as big as like Bleach and a lot of the other series that were popular at the time. And it's just, unfortunately, like if something has just a really terrible ending, it's not going to be remembered well, even though, it had like all these great moments beforehand. If the ending is bad, then people are just going to look back on it and as like more as what it could have been, because, we know how everything ends. I would point that there's various examples of this, like Lost, Game of Thrones, if you want to talk about like Western TV shows. The Journey was great. but and the journey, yeah, is important. But I would say the ending of the journey is just as important, if not even more so. And if you have a bad ending, then people aren't really going to look back fondly on your series. And that's unfortunately the case with Attack on Titan, both with the manga and unfortunately now with the anime.
Yeah, it's just there's just still gonna be a lot of divisiveness and debates over this for the next whatever how many years it's gonna be.
Yeah.
And I mean, if it, I don't know, like I don't know if like Isayama has any more plans to, I don't know, could potentially fix this or just straight up just letting this all play out for the next several generations of how people are going to view his work. But it just feels like yeah, it just feels like I really felt like it could have been done better. There are certain factors that I could point out that like I did mention before that certain things I think could have played a factor into why he made the ending the way he did.
Mm.
Um, like I said, it's just like one of the reasons I could suggest that the anime being announced as being the final season before the manga ended could have played a factor, but I can't really say for sure if that's the main reason, unless Isayama himself, finally comes out and confesses and pretty much explains the detail, out of all of this, like how all of this whole thing played out for him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we'll probably never really know. I mean, unless he, like you said, yeah, unless he comes out and says why things, ended the way they did. But yeah, I just, unfortunately, I don't really have much else to say. I feel like I've said most of what really needed to be said about the issues I had with this. Um, because I read the ending of the manga and I knew what was coming. I already knew like how certain things played out. And when I didn't start seeing a lot of changes with the way what happened in this episode, I really did start to lose hope and in it kind of ending differently than how things ended in the manga. And, of course, everything else ended up playing out exactly the same way. So, yeah, I don't, unfortunately, don't have too much else to say. I guess if I were to give this one like a number rating or something, I'd probably give this special in and of itself, just not necessarily because of the art or the animation or anything, just mainly down to the writing. I give this a 5. I'd give it a 5 because of how like I said, how disconnected it feels from everything else from Attack on Titan, and how the characters feel like they just, like, a lot of them feel very out of character. Eren especially. But animation itself, it was fine. There, of course, like you mentioned, there's quite a bit of CG at times, but I thought it looked fine for the most part. It's pretty much in line with everything we've seen from Mappa that so far with Attack on Titan.
Yeah, it's just
But
I do feel like it was overall. I do feel like the I think the best parts of this special was like how big of stakes that the characters had in trying to stop Eren.
yeah,
I think it's just the point after this kind of went downhill for me.
yeah. But yeah, I don't have too much else to say though. I don't know if you have anything else to say about it.
I mean, overall, I did enjoy Attack on Titan for all these years.
Yeah.
And did I like? eh, I mean, I still have mixed opinions as well about like how like this should have ended. Sure, like I did like that there is an ending, but the way it was handled, like I felt like it could have been done better. I mean, considering that like this has been going on for about a decade now, and eh, yeah, I don't know. I pretty much said what I wanted to said, and of course, you also said what you wanted to say about this. I mean, hopefully, Isayama might come back and really, you know, I don't know. Like, I would say the only thing I can really expect from Isayama is just really try to, just try to explain everything from his point of view, of like how things played out.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, guys, I mean, it's been a wild ride. Attack on Titan has been going on for quite a while now. I mean, it's finally over one way or another. hard to believe it's over. Hard to believe this is actually the last episode of the final season. But yeah, it's over and it ended. I guess we could say that much. Um, I mean, we'll always have questions. We'll always be wondering about what could have been and how things should have been answered and all that. I mean, everybody had their theories, and none of that, of course, came to fruition. I guess in the end, like Aaron says with Ymir, only Ymir knows. I mean, only Isayama really knows what his what could have been. I guess you would say the real ending was, but I guess until we hear it from the horse's mouth, we'll never know for sure. But yeah, guys. So all being said, I guess until next time, we will see you all later.
Mhm.